All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicohle Christopherson, and we are here with Christopher Votey for the second episode of Trying to Publish a Book. And if you want to know what we're doing, the first episode is linked below. If you have no clue, watch that episode, and we are going to get into the thick of it today.
Just to let you know, Nicohle, if you want to use my full first name, as in reference to the way I write my name as an author, please use the middle initial of my name, D. Or if you just want to refer to me directly, just use the name Chris.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's fine. So we had a very good first episode. I know it was kind of impromptu when we told everyone it would be today at 11, and now it's 1, but then we just did it last night because it's like, hey, we're in the mood to write. And, there's a lesson in that a lot of people, the biggest difficulty with writing is that you don't always feel like writing. You don't always feel like putting words down on paper. And it's what really prevents a lot of people from finishing their work. A lot of people will tell you, just write when you feel like writing, and that's a mistake to do. Now, when you really feel inspired to write, like Nicohle did last night, she felt so inspired to work on it. I just kind of like, okay, let's do it, even though it was not what we had scheduled to do. However, my biggest advice to people wanting to write out there is that you just got to do it every single day, even when you don't want to, because that's how you make this a career. This is how you make it a job, is that you just got to force yourself to sit down and start writing. And even if you can only get one word out, at least you were productive to get that one word. And I will acknowledge it's difficult. It's difficult to get into that mindset. But once you do it enough times, then forcing yourself to sit down and write gets a lot easier over time. It's just a method of practice. Now, something I've discussed with Nicohle is the concept that it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. Now, I don't know how true it is, if that's just a saying or if there's some sort of scientific principle behind it, but I do believe that the spirit of what it's saying is true. But when it comes to writing, it's not writing as a skill that takes 10,000 hours. It's every component. 10,000 hours to master commas, 10,000 hours to master characterization, 10,000 hours to master world building. And this is why it takes such a long time to actually get writing done, to actually become good at it. And if you're not willing to put in all of those individual 10,000 hours into it, then I'm afraid that you'll never make it as a writer. It is a lifelong commitment. It is something that we just have to keep doing. Have I mastered all my 10,000 hours? I would probably say no, I haven't. But then that's why I'm always studying. That's why I'm always trying to learn. That's why I have a blog dedicated to writer education. Not so much for everyone else, but more for myself. That if I can sit down and research it and write it out, I'm helping out myself. The benefit is that other people can benefit from what I'm teaching myself. Writing is perhaps one of the hardest things to do, especially today in this world where people want to watch something on YouTube and they can get it instantaneously. And that actually reading a story is a commitment that less and less people are willing to do. So to actually sit down and write a story in hopes that someone will read it, in my opinion, that makes you brave. It makes you brave to maintain an art style that is slowly dying out. Writing is never going to be gone from our society as a whole, but it is going to always be a challenge to get people to read your work. You have any response to that, Nicohle?
Not really. As far as the 10,000 hours go, I agree with you, and it's incredibly difficult to get those hours, especially when mental health or disability issues come into play. But it can be so very rewarding to be able to say, hey, I did this today, and I'm going to continue doing this every day, and it's going to be part of my life forever. And that in and of itself is part of why I'm so pumped up, I guess is a good way to put it, for all of this. Wow, my brain just died on words. Sorry.
Hey, we're writers, not public speakers.
The sad thing is I have taken a public speaking class.
I took a public speaking class. It was called doing live stream on YouTube.
Yeah.
All right. So from the previous episode, we'd gotten about to this point. And I mentioned that her idea of having a river in the middle of Home Depot, while itself wasn't a bad idea, I mean, she can't really explain how it got there. Now, anyone who's watching might say, well, why is it important to know that? Why can't you just say it's there and move on with the story? And you could. You perfectly could, but I'm of the opinion that as a writer, you should know everything that's going on with your universe. It's what we call world building. And if you don't know how something exists, then you need to figure out how it does. And if you can't figure that out, then you shouldn't have it in your story. Now, even if we could figure out how, it came to be, it doesn't mean that we have to write it into the story. But given the logistics of it, I'm strongly suggesting that Nicohle leaves it out of her story, because that's the kind of little thing that can easily convince someone who would nitpick from having a 5-star book to a 3-star book because of logical inconsistency. I refer to our conversation when we talked about fertilizer. And I said, well, what about the movie The Martian? And, watch the video again if you don't remember what it is that she said. You remember what you said, Nicohle?
Yeah, I said that while it was accurate, it takes a long time, and it's very difficult to be able to create fertilizer. But you pointed out that it's difficult to carry big old huge bags of fertilizer at the same time too.
But what you specifically said is that movie has a lot of scientific inaccuracies.
Yes.
Which then, but why does that matter? Why? Well, who cares if it has scientific inaccuracies? Well, and that's the thing. It doesn't really matter. But then people are all like, "Oh no, that's scientific inaccuracies," and somehow that takes away from the plot of the movie. A lot of people have done that with The Martian. It's so funny to me that people will tell me that I nitpick, and then yet I hear as an argument, oh, there's scientific inaccuracies to The Martian. And it's like, that's why we have to do what we do. That's why we have to remain logically consistent in the way we create our world. Now, me and Nicohle have discussed this off camera and have come up with a possible solution. I will not mention it at this time. Nicole's free to do so. But when she rewrites it, we can revisit it at that time. However, her solution would probably still include from this paragraph on. So that's where I'm going to start today. I do want to also state Nicohle, when you sent me this file, you had it with every line tabbed over, basically like this. Every paragraph was tabbed over and it was in Times New Roman 12. My preferred method of editing is pretty much in a block format like this with no tab indentation and in Palatino type 12. Now, that's just my personal preference, but I will say that when it comes to different versions of your book, for doing create space, I recommend using Georgia. It's an open, I believe it's open source, or at least it's allowed to be used for anything you do. And it's very similar to Times New Roman. When you are doing smash words, then you will need to use Times New Roman. I believe you should also do that with Kindle, but since I hand code Kindle books, it doesn't matter what I use. So, but that's just a little information to anyone out there interested in creating ebooks and a print book. So, but for my own sake, I mean, if I do this in the future with anyone else, I mean, it's always best to send me something in Palatino type 12 with no tabbing. You can use tabbing for create space, but then you can't have a space after it, as it's evident here. But that's not a discussion for now. Sorry, you get on a tangent and then you just can't stop talking about it. So let's get started on this. Okay. All right. So, dragging a sheet of plywood over was no simple feat. The wood was heavy and slippery with mold. I mistrusted its ability to hold my weight, but in the end, I didn't have any better options. Lifting it, I let it fall so that it would span the little river, a bridge across the dark, still waters. Stepping onto the wood, my other foot still on terra linoleum, I listened to the stressed wood scream under me. It seemed thick enough. It hadn't bent when I moved it at all. So this, I will say, the way you wrote this is an example of how you need to be writing your paragraphs. It's really joined together. Every sentence seems to be supporting the one prior to it, that you're adding to the thought of her taking a piece of wood over a large gap and walking on it. Can you see how this might be different than your first paragraph that was disjointed?
Yeah, sorry, having trouble with the Control D. Yes, I do see how it is different, and I think it was a stylistic choice. I was trying to be poetic and attract immediate attention with the first paragraph, whereas with this one, I wanted to make sure that I got across what she was doing.
All right, so let's go ahead and break this one down. Dragging a sheet of plywood over was no simple feat. Good. The wood was heavy and slippery with mold. Now, how is it slippery with mold if there's no moisture?
To be honest, I'm not sure. As far as mold goes, it seems to grow everywhere, whether there's moisture or not.
Yeah, but living out here in the desert, you generally need some sort of moisture for mold. While I agree you can have mold without it, you just don't see mold that often.
Good point.
Okay. There's still an element of moisture. I think that you can just leave it as the wood is heavy and not necessarily slippery, unless you want to say that it's slippery because it's a smooth piece of wood. But, you know, it's just better to say that the wood was heavy. That's why it was difficult to move.
Yeah, I think it's best to just remove that.
I mistrusted its ability to hold my weight. Yes, I don't think it'll hold my weight, but I'm going to walk on it anyways. And I was thinking about this last night, and I'm like, well, if it was me doing this, maybe I'd grab a second piece and put it right on top of it to try to maybe strengthen it a little bit. I don't know if that would make a difference, but that would have been my thought if I had any question to it. Because, and I know what you're trying to do here. You're trying to say that, she kind of plays it fast and loose, that, she sees a problem, she tries a solution, and she takes a risk. But there's a difference between bravery and stupidity. And even someone who plays it fast and loose is not going to do something that would cause them to fall and break their neck on a whim.
Fair point. And you're right. As far as shoring up its ability to hold her weight, adding a second one, I don't think scientifically that it actually does anything, but I think that the layman would think that and therefore would do it. So adding a second board would probably be something that she would do.
But in the end, I didn't have any better options. Lifting it, I let it fall. Well, she's already dragging it. So I think what you're saying is that she dragged it to the spot and then lifted it over her while part of it is on the ground. She lifted it up and then threw it over to create the bridge. Um, I lifted it and I let it fall. I would give more of an explanation of that process because, it's just too fast that you're going, ooh, Rockstar Game Bundle. Oh, that's running out. I've already seen it. Sorry, it's like all of a sudden I'm getting like 20 emails at once. It's so annoying. Anyone have a good email app out there for your computer? Because, I just don't have one. Anyways, I would go into more detail about this process. Take us there. Actually describe her dragging it and then stopping right at it and then lifting one side of it up and then pushing against it to let it fall to creating the bridge. I mean, we're only at 18 pages here. We've got plenty of space to give a little more detail here. So,
Okay, I can do that.
stepping onto the wood, my other foot still on the terra linoleum, I listened to the stress wood scream under me. And that's a wonderful sentence right there. That really is an example of showing, not telling, rather than just her saying, I stepped on. Well, I mean, you're still kind of telling, but I mean, the idea that you know she's keeping one foot on the regular ground while she puts one foot, she's testing it to see what happens if she even puts a little bit of her weight on there. So you're letting us know that she's a problem solver, that she's troubleshooting the problem as she's trying to find a solution to it, which speaks a lot to her character in just that one sentence. So that's what you're doing, is showing us an element of her personality. And that's very good right there.
Thank you.
It seemed thick enough. It hadn't bent when I moved it at all. Now, what are you meaning by this? It didn't bend.
Well, I was trying to get across that while it was creaking under her weight, it didn't bow, it didn't bend. like it was going to snap. But honestly, the sentence doesn't make sense and can probably be removed.
I would agree with that. We could probably remove this here because the next sentence or the next paragraph continues on with it. Hesitating, I leaned my weight on the creaking lumber entirely. It protested loudly, but I heard and felt no snap. I could hear my father, his favorite saying, echoing in my ears. Shit, or get off the pot, Morgie. Morgie?
Morgie.
Morgie? I took another
Sure.
step. The wood swayed in a way that made me drop my center of gravity a little. Spreading my legs to support myself better, I continued. Okay, so yeah, I do like this. But what I would do is stepping onto the piece of wood is separate than her moving the piece of plywood and creating the bridge. The creation of the bridge by moving the piece of wood is one thought, and then her stepping onto it is another thought. So this is where we should divide this paragraph right here. So I would go ahead and move this, put it here in the next paragraph. Stepping onto the wood, my other foot still on terra linoleum, I listened to the stress wood scream under me. Hesitating, I leaned my weight onto the creaking lumber entirely. It protested loudly, but I heard no snap. Then what we do is create a new paragraph here because you're kind of expressing her hearing her father speak in her ears. Now, even though that this is an internal thought, we should treat it as actual dialogue. And we need to italicize it to indicate that it's a thought she is hearing. Now, one thing I like to do, and you kind of do it here, is to let people know how I'm going to handle this. You know, it's like, you know, if I was writing something and I'd be like, shit or get off the pot, orgy, and then actually, comma, I thought to myself. And doing that right there lets the reader know that that's how I'm going to handle internal thoughts, or I mean, thoughts that the character says to themselves. So that way, when I use the italicized, come on, you idiot, do it already. I can leave it by itself, and people then know that it's just a thought to themselves because I've already established the pattern beforehand. It's something that without the initial time of identifying it, it can be confusing for the reader. So I just want to make sure that, you know, if I use a new technique, I demonstrate what the technique is for rather than assume that the reader's going to figure it out. But I don't need to do it every single time. Now, you kind of do that yourself with this, that she's hearing her father's favorite saying echoing in her ears. Then we italicize it. And I think it accomplishes the same thing as what I would do. When I go into a long pause, feel free to make any remarks that you like to about that, what I'm saying.
Well, I was actually going to say don't delete that because it was really good. I liked having her kind of talk herself into taking another step.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So, as I said, her stepping onto it. Now, we could throw this into this last sentence here. Well, and that's going to be a stylized choice. Me, I like any sort of dialogue I have, including internal thoughts that a character is saying to themselves. I tend to want to separate from any other narration, any other writing itself to indicate that it's separate, it's a different thought. A paragraph represents a thought. And anytime the thought or the subject changes, we need to create a new paragraph. And this is a big, big problem that I see in the writing community today, because people can easily have paragraphs like this.
Oh God. I can't stand it when there are big old huge paragraphs like that. It makes my brain go no.
So let me show what this looks like. Suddenly you have this big, long ass paragraph that's like 246 words. And it's just so, so, so annoying. I call this a wall of text. And anyone who's played any sort of MMO game knows what I'm talking about. Um, and then you can see how it divides up there because these are all separate thoughts. You know, the average paragraph is going to be anywhere from 40 words to about 70 words. And very few times are you going to have ones that are beyond 100 words, and very rare that it's going to be up to 150 words. But like I said, most of them are going to be between 40 and 70. If you have any long paragraphs, you need to at least consider if there's a way that you can break it up. This one's 95 words, but it's fine the way it is. But as you can see, it just doesn't really have too many long paragraphs. And when this is translated over in CreateSpace, these paragraphs are going to look a lot longer. But imagine that a 200 word paragraph in a CreateSpace printed book is probably going to take up the entire page, if not a page and a half. So, sorry, I just think of these things as I talk about them.
No, it's perfectly fine. And I agree with you as far as the stylistic choice of smaller paragraphs. It reads better. It gives them a place to the reader a place to rest. It generally just looks better too. And I really like that.
It's also a manipulation technique. It gets readers to want to read more of the book. It also gives a sense that they're going through the book faster, because there's a tiny, tiny sense of accomplishment when you finish reading a paragraph and then go on to the next paragraph. So when you see that space between and are like, oh, I just got through another, I just got through another. It's a very subconscious thing, but the more paragraphs we go through, the more we think we're going through the book a lot faster, rather than reading a big long piece of text and then we're like, oh, I don't want to read all of that, I'll just stop for now. And we don't want that. We want people like, oh, I really want to keep reading, but I really have to stop right now. That's the attitude we want people to have with our stories. And you don't want them to come to a big paragraph and decide, oh, no, this is a good stopping point, I'm just going to stop here, I don't want to read that. That's why breaking up the paragraphs is such a good thing to do. And don't feel afraid of the word manipulate. I know it's a dirty, dirty word, but I mean, don't be afraid of it.
I won't.
So in this instance, and I'll let you decide this later what you want to do, I'm going to keep it as a separate paragraph. I could hear my father, his favorite saying, echo in my ears, shit or get off the pot. My father's words were not the only thing in my head, as I heard my own words. As I heard my own words. How do I want to say this? As I heard my own words. I want to basically say like it's voicing its opinion, but I want to say it in a creative way. I heard my own words adding to the conversation. And then I can do this. Oh. Okay. So I could hear my father, his favorite saying echoing in my ears, shit or get off the pot, Morgie. My father's words were not the only thing in my head, as I heard my own words add into the conversation. Come on, you idiot, do it already. What do you think?
I like it.
All right. With that bit of encouragement, I took another step. And it's not necessary to say that, but it really adds to what was done beforehand. So it makes it more joined together. So the wood swayed in a way that made me drop my center of gravity a little. Spreading my legs to support myself better, I continued. So at this point, I see what you're trying to do, and I would add to it more. Like she felt the wood sway, and her heart suddenly stopped, and she paused, and she couldn't breathe, like, oh my God, I'm going to fall to my death. And what we're experiencing here would be the fight, flight, or freeze response, which is also known as the amygdala hijack, which, for point of reference, I've written a very expansive article on my blog about the amygdala hijack to go into a big explanation of it. But basically, what the amygdala hijack is that whenever you have any sort of input into your brain from your 10 senses, it goes through your amygdala first before it goes to the rest of your brain. It's like 1/1000th of a second before it goes to the rest of your brain. But if your amygdala recognizes it as something important, then it's going to hijack your entire brain and force it to do something, such as the fight or flight or freeze response. And in this case, it would be the freeze response, like she felt the wood swayed and suddenly she just stopped, she paused. And in that instance, the best way to use this is to give more detail. Like our hearts go out to her because, oh no, suddenly our hearts have stopped when her heart has stopped. Like, oh no, she could fall, you know. And even if it's just a split second that we experience that, you should use that because it allows us to connect to the character a lot more in that single moment.
Okay. So just expand on it a little bit and give. There we go.
Yeah, green. So expand this sphere is, you know, and that way there's also some more emotion into the story. You're not just telling us what's happened, because that gets boring. You know, we need to feel the emotion. We need our 10 senses, but we also need the emotions of the moment. We can't just say, she stepped on the wood and began to feel it swayed and suddenly got scared and stopped. We need to be like, she stepped on the piece of wood and felt it swayed and her heart stopped and she could feel the sweat pouring from her body as she just kind of looked straight down at the wood, you know. But she forced herself to take a breath and then spread her legs out more. You see what I'm doing right there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically adding on to the description, which is something that you've coached me on before.
Right. So, like I said, just take this opportunity to show us this fight or flight or freeze response, because we've all experienced it at some point in our lives. So when the character's experiencing it, it can trigger us. And I know that's also another dirty word, but it's useful. It can trigger us to know what that feels like and allow us to connect to the character. And that's a very important element for characterization, is that we've got to be able to connect to the character. And Nicohle is actually doing a good job here and allowing us to connect to the character. A lot of people, when they create characters, they only create them in two ways: either to fit the plot or just list their good accomplishments, to list their best attributes. And that's not going to help people remember a character. You need to make them a whole character that is more than just what the plot requires of them. We need to see their weakness. We need to see their bad choices being made. And not bad choices because we need them to make bad choices, but bad choices because these are the decisions that they would make in this instance. And this character, for whatever reason, feels that it's necessary to get on the other side of this ravine, this concrete canyon, or linoleum canyon, however you want to describe it, even though that she got what she came for, which is the seeds. I don't know yet why she needs to get across, but she decides to do so anyways and takes a big risk here. An unnecessary risk, in my opinion, but she takes it anyways. And how many people do you know take unnecessary risks? Or maybe you yourself take unnecessary risks. And it's this negative trait right here, which can easily be a positive trait depending on the moment, allows us to have a connection to the character than anything else.
And I have to agree once again. As far as the character trait goes, I had never intended for it to be a negative character trait, but it is. In especially in situations like this where she's putting herself at risk for something inconsequential, something that is not absolutely necessary. She's just trying to get fertilizer, but honestly, she could have just ignored the fertilizer, taken the seeds back, and everything would have been fine. But because she is human, she goes above and beyond, thinking that, oh, hey, I will get praised by doing this. And it's a case of you take a risk for something that you think is going to be a good outcome, and sometimes it just isn't.
Well, and a good attribute. A good trait is one that is both negative and positive depending on how you want to look at it. Take, for example, being encouraging someone to do better. Well, encouragement is a form of manipulation. You're trying to manipulate a person into doing something that they're otherwise not willing to do. It depends on how you want to look at that, though. And a manipulation, being manipulative, is seen as a bad thing, but it actually isn't. It's a rather neutral thing. It depends on how you're using it. If you're using it for your own personal gain, yes, that's a bad thing. But if you're using it to try to help others along the way, then it's a good thing. But encouraging, good thing. Manipulating someone for your own gain, bad thing. The trait, or if you're encouraging someone simply because you want it to somehow benefit you, that's a bad thing. So, and that's why I say it depends on the situation of whether or not the trait is a good or a bad thing. Like, being sure of yourself is a form of arrogance and egotism. But so having confidence is a form of arrogance. It just depends on the situation. It depends on how it's being specifically used. And in this case, the character is a risk taker. Sometimes that's going to be a good thing and a positive thing. Other times it's going to be a negative thing and a stupid thing. And that is a good method of characterization.
I'm actually really happy to hear you say that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Slow, shuffling steps took me forward, and I felt like Indiana Jones, terrified that one wrong step would end my life. So I'm wondering, because even today, Indiana Jones is a bit of a dated reference.
Yeah, I was going to say, we should probably just remove that.
I mean, you can keep it, but, my problem is not whether or not people today would understand it. I think many people would understand it just fine. My question is whether or not this character understands the reference. Because I presume that this is sometime in the future and that the the fallout from civilization to this post-apocalyptic world has happened within a 5-year span. And while you're nondescript on when this exactly takes place, even if it's a few years in the future, I just wonder if this character really understands what Indiana Jones is.
Probably not. I mean, she isn't really a big TV watcher to begin with. So as far as that goes, it's probably not a good reference to have in.
Well, she's not a big TV watcher, but you did also make a reference to old BBC shows at the beginning, which we did remove, but your description of her not being a big TV watcher would seem almost to contradict what you've already stated in the story.
True.
Because how else would she see old BBC shows if she's not a big TV show watcher? And it's possible that the few times she watched it, she saw something on the BBC. But if she's an American, I don't know. But it's something that you should give serious thought to. And if you're going to say that the character wasn't a big TV watcher before the fall of mankind, then you probably shouldn't put too many pop culture references in there that wouldn't otherwise be well known by what few social interactions she had before the fall of mankind. It's a lot of decisions here. I mean, you can keep the Indiana Jones reference in there, but then you have to identify that this is a reference that the character would have heard of.
Nah, I think it would just be easier to remove it. And honestly, it doesn't really add very much to the story to begin with.
Slow, shuffling steps took me forward, terrified that one wrong step would end my life. Yeah, you'll have to rewrite that sentence for it to be good.
Yeah.
Finally, I was across. I felt like I had taken hours to cross. Time stretches when terror touches. That's a good line right there. I like that. But since this is, well, it's not really a thought, but it's just kind of a saying, but we can still italicize it. And maybe she's even saying this to herself now, and then we're identifying that it's another one of Dad's old sayings. And this is good right here, what you're doing. And this is a very, very subtle thing, but to someone with a trained eye, it's speaking volumes. It's indicating that she has a strong connection to her father. She just remembered two sayings he had in her given situation. When we're stressed out, we look for any comfort we can find. And she's seeking out her father in these moments, which is probably a source of strength for her. So it's really saying that she had a good connection with her father.
That's actually what I was trying to get across, so I'm really glad that you caught that.
Well, it's a very subtle thing. It's very well done, in my opinion. You're not just saying,
well, thank you.
Yeah, another one of Dad's old sayings. I remember back when we were going fishing and he taught me how to hunt and field dress a deer and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, you're now interrupting the narrative to tell something that you could easily just mildly touch upon. And I see writers do that sometimes. And it's like, this is completely unnecessary. You don't need to add this in. Maybe later, when the character's out of the situation, they think back to something like that when the story is not really moving forward at that point. But what you're doing here is perfect because you're indicating a character trait, a characterization without taking away from the forward momentum of the story.
You can't see it, but I'm like beaming over here. I'm so happy.
The aisles on this side of the divide were veiled in darkness. I would definitely change that given what we talked about before with the roof basically falling down and creating this crevice that the character had to go over. Because you also identified earlier that the sun couldn't stop her sneeze. You mentioned that her sneeze had something to do with the sunlight, so we know it's daytime. So unless the crevice, because sometimes like if you ever go to Home Depot's like this as well, but like Walmart, there's a separate section for the garden stuff versus the rest of the store. So maybe she comes over the crevice and is met by doors that lead into another section, and then it's dark, but you need to indicate that. You need to indicate more descriptive details of what the environment looks like. You can't just, and this is another weakness you have, is that one, you don't do it to begin with, but even when you do give us a little bit of an idea of what something looks like, then you stop and you just expect us to understand what the visual world around us looks like from a description several paragraphs back. You still need to throw us a few little tidbits here and there of what a description is. You did describe the river going down and the crevice that was created, and the indication that there was a fear that if it broke, the wood broke, it was deep enough that she could hurt herself. But that doesn't mean stop giving us descriptive details of our environment. We need to be there. Keep us there. Let us feel a part of it. Now, the danger with that is giving too much detail, like spending 5 paragraphs on the particular shade of orange that the wall is. We don't need that, but at least tell us, after I came across the piece of wood, I was met by 2 doors that I presumed at one time automatically opened when someone got close enough, but now we're just permanently open. And I walked through there and was met by a large room of darkness. The room wasn't quite as large as the rest of the store that I just came from, or maybe it's bigger. I don't know. I don't know how you want to do the layout. But it was certainly still intimidating, especially given the darkness, that it was hard to see the other 3 walls of this room. And, in that kind of descriptive detail, it kind of makes the reader, just as the character, feel a little bit small and scared in the given descriptions that were given.
Okay, I think I can manage that. I'm working on some of the rewrites and the layout of the store already for the 2 paragraphs of description that we talked about last episode.
Well, I once wrote a story, and I actually have it completed. I just haven't bothered ever publishing it. It's a goal of mine, but it's just kind of sitting right now. I basically described them going through a space station to find someone. And there was this basically kind of like a lobby-esque room, like there were pillars and all of that and people shooting at them. And I needed a way to describe it, but I couldn't really, I could sort of picture it, but I couldn't really get the specific details I needed because it was high action. I mean, it wasn't that they were just standing at the pillars and just shooting and hoping that they hit something. They were aggressive and they kept moving forward to get to the next part where they could kill whomever was shooting at them. So what I did is I used a program called Visio, which comes with Microsoft Office, but I think there's a open office version of it. And I actually drew out the layout so that when I gave description, I could kind of track where the characters were as I was doing it. And I think that's a good technique to use when you're like planning out how your characters are moving in any particular way that requires a little bit of understanding of where they're facing and what direction they're moving and what they should expect to see. So you could easily just get a general layout of Home Depot and just kind of like say, oh, if my character's here, this is what they will be seeing. This is what they'll be experiencing.
Okay. I think I'll have to do some searching for that, but Visio sounds like a really good program.
Oh, it can be. One of these days, I'm wanting to get Medieval Engineer, which is kind of like a Minecraft-esque program, but it would allow you to build a medieval village.
Ooh.
And I want to get that, learn it, and then teach on how to build your own medieval village based on, the history of the time, but also what's necessary to go into one. Because, many of my future projects is going to require characters moving through a village, and I want to be able to give a belief that the character is there, but the only way I can do that is to know what it would feel like to move through that myself. And there's not a whole lot of point of references out there. I mean, there is a couple of books that can help you with that, but I'd rather take it to the next level so I can give that to my readers.
Makes sense.
All right, so taking out my precious flashlight, I shook it. I had to give a hand to engineers coming up with a flashlight that charges on kinetic energy instead of batteries. I guess that's okay. Would the character know what kinetic energy is? How educated are they?
At least high school level.
Okay,
actually, no, I remember now. She has a little bit of college experience because she was living with her dad while she was in college.
Okay, so that can make sense. Because it does say something about her that she knows what kinetic energy is and how her flashlight works. But we want to make sure that it's saying the right thing about her, or rather, an appropriate thing about her. I mean, a caveman is not going to understand the concept of kinetic energy, but definitely someone who's attended college should have some understanding of physics. Maybe not a great detailed one, but at least know what kinetic energy is.
Exactly.
Sorry. People just, my phone just constantly telling me stuff. Hey, you can remove 900 megabytes of data. I think if I wanted to remove 900 megabytes of data, I'd do it. I shone the light over the shelves. I know what shown means, but I would not use it. I would just say I moved the light over the shelves. That's
okay,
choice, but
that I was trying to figure out how to say that, and I couldn't think of the word moved, so I put shown instead.
That's just funny.
Yeah.
You use a complicated word in place of a simple word you couldn't think of.
Isn't that
Well,
just
sometimes,
a description of my whole career?
well, you know, it's actually a rather common thing that people want to sometimes make things overly complicated because they really want to try to do something special, and sometimes simplicity is the answer. It's a very tight balancing walk between simplicity and complexity. And while I embrace complexity, you know, one of my problems is that I tend to want to overcomplicate things, and I have to tell myself, no, you need to simplify it. You need to keep it simple. You need to keep it moving. So it looked as if I had entered the landscaping section. Fence posts and things lay around all over the place. I hate the word lay. More specifically, the whole lay versus lie and the different uses of it, and how it's just so complicated.
Yeah. It gets so complicated, but I figured I had it right this time. I think. I don't know for certain, but I'm hoping so.
I think lay is correct. Because the difference between lay and lie is whether or not it is you who's laying, or the character who's laying, or another object is laying. Like you lay the book down, but you lie down. You, the character, lie. Yeah, so I do believe that you're using it correctly because things lay around all over the place. And you can thank Grammar Girl for that little demonstration.
Awesome.
Yeah, if you haven't seen her posts, you should check them out because it comes up with some pretty good stuff. It's come up in my research in the past. All right, so this is an internal thought. So italicize it. We don't need to say she said to herself, since we've already established that that's what this is. It's an internal thought. And it looks like the rest of this as well. Who decides where things go in stores anyway? At what point do they decide that these random fence posts, 2 words, need to go next to these rusting and overgrown lawnmowers? So it's just a short aside, a commentary on what she's experiencing, and which is perfectly fine. As long as we don't really have a monologue of what's happening, it's wonderful. It really adds to it. It gives it a little bit more flavor.
Okay. And our time is pretty much up at this point.
Okay.
This seems like a good stopping place. Once again, thank you very much for going over it all with me. I appreciate your continued participation in this series. And we will try and get an announcement up of when the next episode will be up as soon as we can.
Well, I do want to say that it looks like your writing is improving. So maybe the difficulty that I'm noticing now is that it's just starting it off, but once you get into a groove of it, your writing starts to improve. So that's something I want you to think about when you, with your career, is try to improve the starting of a story. But once you're done with that, then you really start to really get into it and your writing gets better.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate the feedback. I hadn't considered that. I honestly thought my beginnings were the best part of my writing and then everything petered out after that. So,
well, definitely your first 2 pages could use improvement, but I mean, here we are in the 3rd page, and I'm having less criticisms to give you as far as the writing itself goes.
all right. It sounds like something major is going on upstairs. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And thank you once again.
All right. Well, you have a good night.
You too.